and welcome to another Sensibility podcast. Today we have Jarrad from Global Financial Consultants, and Jarrad's going to be talking to us about financial advice with expats, and he's actually located over in Singapore. And so I really this topic interests me because, I think we all need to have a concept of what could be if we are going to be offered work overseas, or even actually understanding the greater work that advisors do, and also the importance of getting financial advice, even if it is considering moving for another job. Jarrad and I actually had a very lengthy conversation a couple of weeks ago, but then so this is really take two because my internet died, and so we've had to re-record. So I'm going to pretend I know nothing about Jarrad's work and the good work that he does, and also his colleagues over here in Australia in Perth. So I'm going to just, first of all, take it over to you, Jarrad. I want you to just introduce what your business is and sort of what kind of services you are offering expats over in Singapore.
Sure, thanks, Amy, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here for Take Two. So yes, as Amy said, I'm based in Singapore. We look after the personal finance or financial advice for Australian expats based in Singapore. That's now expanded to all over the world. So there's over 1 million Australian expats all over, some of whom have, I guess, taken the decision to move home over the last 12, 18 months. And then I think as we sort of exit COVID, there'll be many more who are looking at offshore opportunities. As you mentioned, we then have a link up, a tie up with a firm in Perth. So that's largely been set up to look after our Australian expat clients' Australian assets. So things like superannuation, insurances, they might have mortgages or need some debt planning in Australia, and then also to look after them once they actually return to Australia. We find that Australia, being the big, beautiful sandpit that it is, most people will at some stage in either their career or life actually look to return to Australia. So it's important that we have that connection and can kind of continue the relationship.
Absolutely. Well, we were talking last time about the immense planning that can go in for someone who actually decides, okay, I've got this career opportunity. I'm going to uproot my family and we're going over to Singapore. It's going to be very exciting. But then there's all these little, not issues, but there are things that you need to iron out and consider. And superannuation is one of them. And we discussed that there are similar sort of concepts over in Singapore, and of which that some companies will offer an expat so they can actually earn a retirement savings scheme, so to speak. Do you want to just explain those two types of sort of offers that someone in Singapore would be earning, and then we'll sort of break it down on how it could work for someone who's traveling over, working over in Singapore and returning to Australia?
Yeah, certainly. So there's two main schemes, and then there's kind of a third that some companies offer. So I'll touch on that last because it's quite different to the traditional schemes that we have here. But the first retirement scheme, or the equivalent to superannuation, if you like, is what they call the CPF, which is the Central Provident Fund, so Singapore's government or own pension system. And within that CPF, so the CPF system is for Singapore citizens or permanent residents of Singapore. So if you're an expat or a foreigner on a work visa, an employment pass, an S pass, then you won't actually be eligible for CPF. Now, it's a little bit different to superannuation in that it's actually split down into 3 different accounts. You have what they call the ordinary account, which is sort of your everyday savings. You can use that to buy local Singapore property at some stage throughout your life, as long as you meet a raft of other conditions. You've then got your special account, which effectively, once you turn 55, can then convert into your retirement account. And then you've got your medical account, which is kind of there to cover your medical insurance at a local Singapore level. So it's a little more diverse than super because it just gives them, I guess, more choice in terms of where that money goes.
I love this concept. It's such a great, so it's like a little safety net. You've got little umbrellas along the way. So, but it isn't available to expats.
No.
So what is the other one that is?
Yeah, so there are then kind of 2 others. So the first is what they call the Supplementary Retirement Scheme, or the SRS, which allows both Singapore citizens, permanent residents who have CPF as well to contribute, but it also allows sort of expats like ourselves who are on work visas, employment passes, to set up. We can contribute about $36,000 a year. It fluctuates slightly year to year, and that acts as a tax deduction. That money can then be invested in a range of funds, different investments, and typically you would want to hold that vehicle for 10 years. Because of the tax deferral, and we won't go into all of the nitty-gritty details today, because I'm sure some of your listeners will get bored, but effectively it's a bit of a long-term retirement setup for us as Aussie expats.
Which is similar to how we have the superannuation vehicle. So, our contributions are considered a tax deduction, and then it's invested for the long term. So what would be an issue or an implication if you were working in Singapore and you have been there for a good decade or even longer, and then, your time's up or you're close to, you just want to slow down, or another offers come or positions come back in Australia, or it might be to do with your kids' education. Who knows? You're just heading back. What would be the issue there with moving that product back to super?
Great question. So if you have held it for a long time, as long as you roll it into superannuation relatively quickly, so Australia will typically give you about 6 months to consolidate your assets back into the country. If it's a rollover into super, then there shouldn't typically be any issues at all, but it won't actually be a rollover. It'll be a contribution. So that kind of opens up another element of planning in that, we've got, as you're well aware, obviously concessional, non-concessional limits. So we need to look at how all of that's actually going to play in together. So it's not exactly like super because you can access it prior to retirement.
Right. Now, this is where your expertise will come into play. And then also probably, you'll need your connection with your team in Perth, because if you are in a situation where you've got over that $300,000 and you've got less than 6 months, you got 6 months to roll that into a fund, then you will need some additional planning and advice around the difference, and also that where that money is going to go. So it means you can withdraw it, so they can actually take the difference. They say they're $500,000, 300 can go in, so long as they're not going to be putting in 100,000 over the next couple of years. And I won't go into all the rules, but and I know that there's quite a lot of advisors that do listen to this podcast, so they'll understand that. And if you don't, reach out. Don't hesitate to ask questions. You can contact either us when this is up on my website. So there are no such things as stupid questions. But what I'm saying is, if there was $500,000 coming back to Australia, 300 goes into super, that 200 now needs to be allocated somewhere in some kind of investment. So it actually keeps working for the now expat.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's just sort of understanding, again, how that sort of repatriation plan is going to look, where the different pots are going to go. One of the common strategies for a lot of Australian expats is really saving up to either sort of extinguish their mortgage when they return home, or to have a decent sized deposit to pay off a new home when they return. So again, it's just sort of understanding, what pot of money is going to go where really when you return home, making sure limits are not being breached, making sure it all works tax-wise, and you've kind of genuinely made the most of your time, while you've been in Singapore or elsewhere for that matter.
Yeah. And that's the other thing, the elsewhere. It's a nice segue to what I was going to ask as well, is that your business doesn't just deal with people, expats locating to Singapore. You're in a very central part of the world. So you're dealing with expats all over the place. So in that, you'll have to have a very clear understanding of all sorts of different rules and regulations when it comes to retirement savings.
Yeah, look, that's exactly right. We deal with clients in the typical expat hubs, if you like. So your New Yorks, your San Franciscos, London, Hong Kong, Singapore, typically all very common. You get a lot of multinational firms that are shifting their staff all over the world. So you tend to get a very good understanding of those jurisdictions. But then you'll get the curveballs, the Mongolias, the Latvias, the other parts of Eastern Europe or Cambodia. So I guess that's probably one of the most interesting parts of this job, is really understanding how those systems work, what the setups look like, how does that work when you return to Australia, all of those moving pieces. So definitely quite fascinating.
I bet. So you'd see the good, the bad and the ugly. And I say it that way because some countries really work well with the Australian system, like we, with the UK pension, for example, Kiwi Super, 401k, a little bit different, but it can be workable, right? But, some countries you would find there'd be an issue with getting the money back to Australia. So I know we talked about this before. I've had a case like that where the clients had funds in Papua New Guinea, and we were only allowed to bring in, I think it was 100,000 or 200,000. I'm not sure now that, exchange rate there per year. So it's a long process to get $1 million over back to Australia. So you wouldn't want to have to need that money in a hurry. Have you got cases like that?
Yeah, look, I'd have to say it's probably one of the biggest frustrations. The restriction of the movement of capital is not terribly common because you've only got a few countries that sort of fall into that category. But I think the biggest issue is a lot of these Australian expats will work in, let's say, London or Hong Kong or even Singapore in some instances, where they get into the local pension system. They've saved up all of this money, and you can't actually roll it into superannuation. You have to wait until you retire. So all of these, Aussie expats end up with these pots of money in all sorts of different jurisdictions, and they've never kind of tied them all together. If you ask them what their net worth was, they might have a rough idea, but that's about it.
Yeah. So you would probably have to create a sort of a CRM, a spreadsheet, or some kind of system where they can actually see what their actual net worth is based on all that information.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So what the account number is, what the provider is, how much it's worth, all the usual things that people forget.
Yeah. So that's the headache us advisors often go through, that fact-finding process and the research. And, sometimes I say it's going to take a few weeks. Sometimes it takes longer. I guess your headache is much bigger than the average Australian kind of fact-find process.
Yeah, look, it certainly can be. There are some providers where you're genuinely waiting months for statements. There are some providers that may not even exist anymore. They might have transitioned over to a new company or been rebranded. The Australian expat has no idea who they've been rebranded to because maybe they didn't update their address on file, or they forgot about it, or they got busy, life got in the way. It's often some interesting discussions.
Yeah, I bet. So you really have to be you've got to have these, these skills in regards to your technical skills, but these soft skills to manage. I can only imagine if you've been working in a country for many, many years, and then, along the way you're changing jobs, and then you travel to another country and then not have any idea where that money's gone. That would be incredibly stressful for someone. How do you deal with that? Lots of hand-holding? Hand-holding, I mean.
Look, that's exactly right. It is just lots of hand-holding. Thankfully, there aren't too many cases where we're not able to identify who it's with. Particularly, as I said, those expat hubs that are more common for our clients to work in will generally know, if a company has changed hands, if they've rebranded, who they've become, who the contact point is. So even if the clients have no idea where it might be, we can, generally help them find it. It's going to take a little bit of time, but quite often, we'll be able to track it down.
And this comes back down to why someone really needs to get advice and speak to someone who's an expert in, the expat space. And I know you guys have, leaders in that space. But we talked also about planning, and I don't want to scare people who are thinking, I want to go overseas, I've got this amazing opportunity, and then think, oh, it's going to be all too difficult. Because if you've got someone in your corner like yourself, it would make it so much easier to manage. And if you get in early and get the whole process organized very early in the piece, then all of those years of working overseas and even traveling will be so much more organized and sorted out. And that's something that we talked about you did as well, is you can give sort of advice on the process of moving from one country to another and how to get set up and the banking system, the tax system, and just all the entrance sort of level of moving from one country to another. Can you give us an idea of that kind of service that you would be able, sort of advice or direction you could give someone?
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, it's been a very interesting.
Whoops.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Start again. It's been quite an interesting journey. So I've been in Singapore now for just shy of 8 years. And for the first 2 to 3 years, it was all about the expat package. So no one really had any worries about money because they were all earning arguably too much money. The rent was paid for, the trips home were paid for, school was paid for. So without really having any discipline or trying at all, everyone could save a good amount of money. So no one really sought out advice, generally speaking. Very few sought out advice before they actually left. So let's say they were moving from Australia to Singapore or to Hong Kong or to some other country. They just kind of figured, she'll be right because the income level is going to be so high, we don't really need to worry. And then over the last 5 years, we've transitioned into this situation where these expat packages don't really exist anymore. People are still earning great money, but it's not what it once was. So now all of a sudden we need to actually plan, we need to save, we need to be a little more disciplined about our expenses. And what we've noticed, and we try to be sort of relatively active on social media, videos, and provide as much helpful content as we can, is a lot more people are reaching out 3, 6, 12 months before they're actually leaving Australia. And so they're arriving in Singapore, and instead of getting sort of sucked up into the whirlwind of life in a busy expat city, they know that their savings are on track, their health insurance is set up, their Australian insurances are going to cover them while they're here, their super remains appropriate. All of those sort of personal finance housekeeping items are done.
Fantastic.
And they know, they already have a plan in place so that if they're in Singapore for 2 years, 3 years, 25 years, they know that if and when they eventually do leave, they can actually look back and know that they made the most of it.
And that's amazing because I know I'm a planner, so I like to know that everything's going to be organized. Like I'm one of those people that when I travel overseas, I carry a folder of everything printed out, medicals and everything, all insurances, just in case. Everything's digital, but I still do it. So that kind of concept, knowing that there is a service that if there's an opportunity for a career overseas, which is incredibly exciting, and I'm uprooting my entire family, and that's education and where to live, the insurance, all of that being organised would just be so much easier just to jump in and get into that career and get into that lifestyle. So there's another reason to even just reach out and get that advice early in the piece.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We find particularly Singapore, Hong Kong, and I can only speak, I've only lived in Singapore as an expat, so been through this experience ourselves, and we know the first year just disappears in a flash. By the time you move in, you figure out, where on earth do I buy furniture? Realize there's no Big W or Kmart or Target here. So you've got to go and try and go through the trenches, figure out where you're going to buy all this stuff to fill your house. And you look back and the first year is gone.
Yeah.
You've saved nothing, you plan for nothing. The more you can kind of get that done either before you go, or at least have an idea what it's going to look like, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah. And I guess we're also and we spoke about this before we came on air this time around, and we didn't discuss it much when we did our first take, which didn't go to air, is what things are like now in Singapore for during COVID, and how it has actually affected businesses, and if there's an exodus of expats coming back to Australia, or if it's business as usual.
Yeah, good question. So Singapore, as I guess anyone who's spent a bit of time in Singapore would probably expect, got onto this very early. They obviously had a bit of a plan in place from SARS. And I remember being here in Singapore, January, February of 2019, and noticing that certain, train station exits were being closed, shopping center entrances were shutting, and sort of remember thinking it all felt a bit strange. Why is Singapore sort of overreacting to this, virus that is not really spreading anywhere? Mm-hmm. And it all felt very surreal. And then obviously by March, the Western world woke up to exactly what had happened. And then very quickly, Singapore went into sort of full lockdown, if you like, for I think just shy of 2 months. Mm-hmm. They called it circuit breaker here. So Singapore likes to have a title for most things so that people can understand exactly what's involved.
Yeah.
So that was you can only leave your house for essentials. You can only leave for a short period of exercise, and masks, must be worn at all times. So yeah, very strict lockdown initially.
Mm-hmm.
And then they gradually started reopening. So businesses were allowed to return to the office, but only at limited capacities.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of businesses are still working from home and will likely continue for the remainder of this year.
Mm-hmm.
And then restaurants or dining facilities have all gone from around 50% up to 65% capacity allowed now. So a lot of them are obviously suffering because it's just not bringing in enough revenue to sustain themselves. And we're now in a position, I guess, so what are we, mid-Feb of this year? We're about to head into Chinese New Year. So the Singapore government's a little bit nervous around any blow-ups in numbers on that side, but things are very slowly returning to some degree of normal, I guess. Masks are still essential. The only other sort of major restriction, I think, for many is that venues, so bars, nightclubs, restaurants have to be or have to stop serving alcohol from 10:30. So a bit of a change for most expats as far as their everyday lives are concerned.
Yes, I have been to Singapore and sort of going out for dinner and then going to a bar afterwards is a very healthy lifestyle, even, in terms of having a few drinks and, it's very similar lifestyle to Sydney, actually, I think, but that would be very different. So why would they restrict the drinking it after 10:30? Is it just because people get a bit too relaxed about things?
Look, I think that's exactly right. So they've imposed a restriction where there can only be 8 people together at a venue. You can only have 8 visitors to your home. So they want to keep the groups or the gatherings quite small. And I think the concern is, if people are still out drinking after 10:30, then perhaps that gets quite difficult to manage,
right,
from their perspective. So,
okay. And have you noticed has there been an increase of people going home, like expats going home this year?
Yeah, look, there certainly has. Last year, limited number of our clients and a limited number of Australian expats actually lost their jobs. So that was very pleasing to see. But the big issue, I think, for a lot of Australian expats, particularly here, is most of us live here because it is, as you highlighted earlier, the regional hub, a great place to travel from. The airport is consistently the best in the world.
Absolutely.
And in my opinion, nothing even comes close. It's very, very fast, very user-friendly, and you can take a weekend trip to most parts of Asia very easily. And we're now in a position where that obviously didn't happen last year. It's potentially unlikely to happen this year. So I think a lot of people who are still employed, are still saving money, are still living their normal lives here, are saying, well, the kids can't play sport, we can't travel, what are we doing here? Let's just go back to Australia. So my expectation is 2021 will see potentially a larger exodus of Australian expats than 2020 did.
Right. So you're going to be busy.
Going to be very busy, that is for sure.
Yeah. So, anyone who's listening who are expats working in Singapore, it's probably best to get in touch with Jarrad and his team to get that organised before you head back to Australia, to make sure all your ducks are in a row.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're starting to see a little bit of traffic coming the other way in terms of people actually coming into Singapore. And I think that'll continue. But I think for a lot of people, again, with one of Singapore's key attractions, other than the ridiculously low tax rate, is that there are so many travel opportunities from here. So I think as Singapore starts to reopen, as travel becomes a possibility again, that's when I think we'll start to see a real ramp up in more Australians actually coming here for work.
Well, it's certainly a country I would love to live in. I remember going there and going, oh, I could live here easily. And I was around the corner of Orchard Road, and it was just the best. And also I love the food over there. So you're in a very lovely part of the world, I have to say. And I'm looking forward to getting back there. That's just definitely one of the places I would be traveling when things start opening up. Now, back to sort of what we do as advisors. Your business, your core business is to assist your expats, Australians, in making sure that their assets are being looked after. Obviously, you would have services like you would have, investment strategies and insurances and things like that. I mean, not talking too much on product, but it is important to ensure that you've got the right vehicles in place for that when these clients come to you. Is there sort of quite a array of options when it comes to investing in Singapore and creating portfolios for clients?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So there's an array of platforms, not terribly dissimilar to the platforms and products that are in Australia. I would say the one critical difference is they tend to be more global. I think
Which
a lot
is
of
a
particularly,
positive.
yeah, look, that's exactly right. I think a lot of Australian expats, particularly if Singapore is their first sort of foray into expat life, realize just how small Australia is, and opens up this world of investment opportunities in overseas companies. So yeah, certainly having platforms, I guess, where they can get that international exposure from an investment standpoint, particularly Australian dollar exposure is obviously quite important to mitigate some of the FX risk, depending on how long they plan to stay here. From an insurance standpoint, it's sort of understanding, are the insurers actually going to cover them if and when they return to Australia? Will they cover them if they get relocated for work somewhere else?
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that. So, because insurance is something that, especially like income protection or trauma cover, is quite important when you are working. You want to protect yourself as the asset that's creating that income. Do you have those kind of offerings over there?
We
Of
do,
course you
yeah.
would,
So
but are
exactly
they
the same
different? Are they the
in
same?
Australia. A couple of key differences I think here are that the coverage is typically always global with most of the international insurers, because it has to be. Most Australian expats in particular are not going to live in Singapore through to retirement. So having cover that will cover them, as I said, back in Australia, quite a number of them tend to be multi-currency. So particularly if, for example, if someone was diagnosed with a disability or an illness, or heaven forbid, passed away, if the family would relocate to Australia in that scenario, well, perhaps we should have the policy in Australian dollars just to reduce that FX risk.
Wow. So there's a lot of flexibility there for someone who is traveling and working overseas, which is, I'm obviously an advocate to insurance and ensuring that people, consider their risk and make sure that they are protected for all sorts of things. Obviously, to a point, we're not, overly protected, but enough that they have that peace of mind. So that's important to know. Another reason to have that conversation, especially potentially before moving overseas, or once you're there, getting all that sorted out, because you do not want to be stuck overseas and not protected especially what we've just seen with COVID.
Yeah, look, that's exactly right. I mean, I think one of the unfortunate parts of our job is, I guess, typically most advisors are going to have been through claims with their clients or families of clients or friends of clients. And it's not a fun experience, but
No.
certainly a much better experience than if there was no cover at all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we're all there. I mean, if you're going over there to work, you're there to work and earn money to create a lifestyle, and you need that protected. So there's no point being there without protecting that. And it is a wonderful country, but there's also amazing countries that expats are living. As you said, we shouldn't just restrict this to where you are located in Singapore, but because your services are extensive worldwide. So that actually is a good question in respect to the worldwide. Have you got access to covering people in other countries? There's a lot
Yeah,
you'd have to learn.
yeah, that's exactly right. The majority of countries. So for some, we'll have an idea what the local products look like, what they need to watch out for. But certainly with some, there'll be, the need to actually work with a local advisor on the ground there to assess and understand, all right, what does the local life insurance policy look like? Is it good? Is it bad? do we need a top up or a backup or something different altogether?
Right. Fantastic. So there's actually so many more options than just getting everything sorted out here. You actually can get parts of it sorted out here and actually cover them extensively elsewhere as well. Fantastic. I love that.
Yeah.
Um, Now, I think we've covered almost everything that you're doing over there in terms of uh, superannuation, investing, and insurance, and also preparing people to get there and to get home. I'm just wondering if there's anything else that I wanted to ask you because I think we've really covered the majority. I guess, have you got any stories or any experiences that sort of may have thrown you or wins that you could share?
Yeah, look, certainly. Probably a couple of key stories.
Hmm.
One which kind of highlighted the early days, I guess, of just how good the expat packages were and all the rest of it. I remember a gentleman came into the office. He was the 2IC at a global auto brand, and his boss had just been let go. And they'd both been in Singapore for around 11 years, so quite a long time, living the good life, earning great money. And we sat down, we're going through the fact find, having a bit of a chat about what he's looking for. And throughout the sort of fact find experience, he's outlining how much he's earned. And we went through his balance sheet and his cash flow and highlighted for him that he'd actually spent about $11 million
Wow.
and had absolutely nothing to show for it.
Oh my goodness.
And we both kind of looked at each other, both felt a bit sick, him more than I,
As you
obviously.
do, yeah.
And he said, look, I know what we've done. We need to draw a line in the sand and we need to do something about this. Because, the tax rate is so low here, there is no capital gains tax. So yeah, that was certainly an eye-opener, I think, in terms of we don't see that very often anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think that mentality is largely gone. People have seen their friends, their colleagues, actually depart Singapore, those who've done very well and those who've kind of done very poorly or who have very little to show for it.
Yeah. And that's where good advice comes into play, right? Getting
Yeah.
someone to go, okay, you can have your cake and eat it too. Let me show you how.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, that's exactly right.
that you can still have an amazing lifestyle and save and invest and prepare for your future. And then that way you're actually stretching what you're earning now for the future so that you can still have an amazing lifestyle when you're no longer in Singapore earning that amazing money in that amazing tax environment.
Yeah, look, that's exactly right.
And in a perfect world, then coming to Australia, retiring in an even amazing, better tax environment, with your superannuation, your pension. If you get
Yeah,
it all that balancing right in the perfect world, obviously there's tax needs to be paid in certain things and certain assets, and there's capital gains in Australia. But our job is to navigate and direct our clients to get the best outcome with earning their money, protecting their money, investing their money, and retiring with their money so that they can continue on. So that would have been an incredible eye opener. $11 million and nothing to show for it.
yeah, quite terrifying, really. So yeah, thankfully, as I said, we don't see those anymore, and I genuinely hope that no one's still living that sort of lifestyle here. I'm sure there would be a handful, but yeah, certainly far less common.
Yeah. I guess you probably could use that story when you see someone, coming in and they're just so excited about their new lifestyle and the kind of income that they're earning. And you can sort of rein them in and go, hey, do you want to be that guy or that woman? This
Yeah,
is this
that's
this
exactly
is
right.
this is the way. Sorry, I'm a bit of a Star Wars nerd. Yeah, so showing them the way. So I'm quite impressed with how much you would have to learn and how many different types of, besides the three types of streams of retirement savings that you need to know. There's so many other things that you would have to learn about outside of Singapore as well. So you're quite an expert in that field. So I would be definitely saying if anyone needs to get some advice and even preparing to go overseas or once you're over there, and doesn't matter if you are in Singapore, to definitely reach out to Jarrad. All your information we'll be putting on our website. I'm going to be putting this on my social media stream, and you're welcome to, and also which includes YouTube, and also I'd be you should be popping this up on yours, because I think the more we talk about what financial advice is, it gives people more of an understanding and comfort to know that maybe what they need, and it isn't. I believe it. There are some extremely expensive services out there, but if you go in with an open mind and actually understand the value and how you can actually get ahead long term, it's certainly worth the investment and the time to speak to someone like yourself or myself or anyone within our communities, just to take those first few steps to get yourself on that financial pathway.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I really want to thank you today for your time and for coming back again, second time around for you. And if anyone has any questions, please reach out to us. Sorry about the noise in the background then. Please reach out to us, contact Jarrad and myself. We're both available online. And I'm also wanting to, by the way, put this on the XY community, because we met through an advisory sort of community, for financial advisors and people in our industry. And I think they'd be really happy to hear what you have to say as well. So I really appreciate your time today, Jarrad.
Thanks, Amy. It's been a lot of fun. I really
Yes,
appreciate your time and the opportunity.
Oh, thank you. All right. We'll see you soon.
No worries. Thank you.
Oh, and by the way, everyone, hit like if you like this and this podcast. There are going to be more. I've had a bit of a break, but I'm back. Thank you.